A lone man opened his cabin door in the dead of winter, not to a knock but to the sound of a dying wolf howling through the storm. She wasn't hunting, she was begging for her pups. What he did next broke every rule of survival, but as the snow kept falling, something unexpected took root between them: trust. And months later, when she returned from the woods, she wasn't alone. What happened during those quiet days on the mountain will stay with you long after the final snow melts. Snow had blanketed Silver Ridge in a way that erased the landscape's edges, leaving only the silhouettes of pines and the jagged teeth of the mountains behind them. The air tasted like copper and frost. It was mid-January in northern Colorado, and the storm had been building since morning. By twilight, the temperature had plummeted to 28 degrees, and the wind howled with a kind of wild memory. The town of Ellery Creek, 40 miles downhill, had already lost power by sunset. But Caleb Whitlock hadn't relied on the grid in nearly 7 years. His cabin sat 3,000 feet above the nearest road, crouched into the slope like a tired old man. Built of hand-hewn timber and set into stone footing, it was more than shelter. It was a fortress against memory. Caleb, now 49, had built it with his own hands after leaving the U.S. Forest Service, abandoning the ashes of his former life in Glen Haven. That town, and the fire that swept through it, had taken his wife Miriam and his son Luke. Caleb never spoke about the fire, but the lines in his face were etched by it. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a weathered jaw and salt-streaked hair kept just long enough to tie back. His eyes, a muddy green, held the watchfulness of a man who once trusted the woods but no longer trusted fate. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the stone hearth. The single room smelled of pine and wool. On the mantel sat a dusty picture of Miriam laughing, wind in her chestnut hair. Caleb rarely looked at it anymore, though he never moved it. Outside, the wind banged against the shutters and the snow came down like broken glass. Caleb sat at the small pinewood table, finishing the last of his venison stew when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Faint, broken, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. A wolf's cry. It wasn't the confident howl of a lone male or the chorus of a hunting pack. It was short, guttural, and unsteady. Caleb froze, spoon mid-air. The sound came again, closer. It was wrong for this time of year. Wolves didn't call like that in the dead of winter, not unless something was very wrong. He stood, grabbed his parka from the hook by the door, and slid on his boots. Years of training hadn't dulled his instincts. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness in slices. He stepped onto the porch, cold air clawing at his face. The wind stung his eyes, but his gaze locked on movement near the tree line. There, just beyond the windbreak of cedar trees, a she-wolf staggered into the open. Her coat, matted with ice, had once been a pale gray. Now it was clumped with snow and speckled with blood near her left flank. Behind her, 2 pups struggled to keep up, barely larger than house cats, their legs too short for the drifts. They stumbled, collapsed, rose again. Caleb's breath caught. The mother turned her head toward him. Their eyes met. There was no aggression in her stance, no show of teeth, just raw, unfiltered desperation. He knew this scene. Not exactly, of course, but once, years ago, he'd seen a father carry his son through smoke-filled woods, clothes on fire, eyes begging the world to give them a second chance. That father had been him. The wolf's legs buckled. One of the pups fell nose first into the snow and didn't rise. The other whimpered, circling back toward its mother. Caleb stepped forward and the mother growled weakly, her body swaying. He didn't move closer. Not yet. Back inside, he turned on the generator to power a space heater in the old storage room beside the cabin. The same room where he used to store his camera equipment. It was fully insulated, had a thick rubber mat on the floor, and had been cleaned out a month ago when he thought about building a greenhouse wall. Now, it might serve as a second chance for someone else. He pulled out 2 old wool blankets from a trunk. His fingers shook, not from fear, but from knowing exactly what this choice could cost. Survival guides had always been clear: don't feed predators, don't invite danger to your door, don't assume desperation won't turn deadly. But survival wasn't the same as living. Meanwhile, 20 miles south in Ellery Creek, Emma Coulter hunched over her tablet inside a small research cabin lent by the local rangers. She had been in Colorado for 3 weeks and already had frostbite scars to show for it. At 32, Emma was a lean, athletic woman with wavy, shoulder-length hair the color of roasted almonds and a deliberate, quiet voice. She had studied animal behavior at Oregon State and turned down tenure to work in the field. Her colleagues thought she was reckless. She called it personal. Ever since a childhood spent watching a gray wolf vanish into the timber while her parents argued outside the car, Emma had believed that there was a language between humans and animals. Subtle, wordless, but real. Tonight, her eyes scanned GPS data on the collared wolves she'd been tracking. Something wasn't adding up. Luna, a female tagged 3 years ago, was supposed to be in hibernation range west of the reserve. Instead, her signal was spiking erratically near Silver Ridge, close to a dead zone known for rock slides and sudden frost pockets. Emma zoomed in. The dot blinked twice. "No," she muttered. "Why are you climbing uphill?" She clicked her radio, but static met her. The storm was jamming the repeater towers. She made a quick note. Luna moved northwest, signal weakening. Possible den disturbance. Further investigation needed once weather clears. Back on Silver Ridge, Caleb stood just outside the storage room, holding the blanket like a peace offering. The wolf family now huddled near the edge of the porch. The pups were barely breathing. He moved slowly, keeping his movements visible, voice low. "It's just a room," he murmured. "It's warm. It won't fix everything, but maybe it'll buy you a night." The mother's ears twitched, but she didn't growl. He stepped back, left the door ajar, and waited. The snow thickened behind him, closing off the woods in a white curtain. Caleb glanced at the thermometer nailed beside the cabin. 31 Zurks and falling. Then he saw it. Just a flicker. The she-wolf nudged one of her pups with her nose, then limped forward, dragging it by the scruff gently through the snow. The second pup stirred weakly. She looked up once more toward the light inside the storage room, then toward Caleb. Not a test, not a threat, just a plea. Caleb opened the door wider and stepped aside. Some rules are meant to be broken, especially the ones that forget mercy. The wind had grown sharp enough to carve through layers of clothing, a serrated howl that rattled every shutter on the cabin. Caleb stood just inside the open door of the storage room, breathing hard as his fingers tightened around the thick wool blanket now damp with snow. The dim, yellow glow from a single camping lantern cast long shadows across the floor, flickering slightly with each gust that snuck through the cracks. The mother wolf still hadn't moved. She stood at the edge of the porch, her paws buried in the snow. Her sides heaved with exhaustion, ribs too prominent beneath her ice-matted coat. The 2 pups lay in the drift beside her. Small, unmoving forms whose only sign of life was the shallow rise and fall of their chests. Their fur was dull, crusted with frost, legs stiff from cold. Caleb knew the clock was running out. He had spent nearly a decade documenting animal behavior across North America before leaving it all behind. And now, standing in the doorway of his self-imposed exile, the decision that once would have made perfect sense to a field-trained ranger now felt like a gamble with something sacred. He took a step forward. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The mother's ears twitched, but she didn't growl. Caleb knelt beside the pups, the cold instantly biting through his jeans. "Easy now," he murmured, his breath visible between them. He reached slowly, one hand at a time, until the blanket covered the smaller pup completely. He lifted gently. so gently, and was surprised at the weight, lighter than it should be. Starvation was at play, not just cold. The mother wolf inched forward. Still no growl, no lunge, just breath, ragged and steaming in the frigid air. He carried the first pup inside, laid it on the padded corner of the storage room, and returned for the second. This one whimpered faintly when lifted. Caleb's chest tightened. A good sign. Maybe. The mother followed, one slow step at a time, until she stood in the open doorway. Her eyes scanned the room, alert but not panicked. The warmth hit her like a wall. She paused, then crossed the threshold, her frame barely squeezing through the opening. Her head brushed the frame, but she never broke eye contact. Caleb shut the door behind her. She circled the pups, sniffing each blanket-covered body with urgency. Then she lay beside them, curling protectively, massive paws tucking them close. Caleb backed out of the room slowly, closing the inner door without latching it. He sat down on the wooden floor of his main cabin, breathing hard, heart pounding in a way it hadn't since his firefighting days. The impossible had happened. Across the ridge, Emma Coulter zipped her thick down parka to the throat and leaned over her cluttered work desk. The monitor still blinked a weak GPS signal. Luna, the collared female, had stopped moving. Last location, 38.8370 TTD Giren, 106.9874 DOW. Elevation 9,600 feet. That was dangerously close to avalanche zones. The response team at the Wildlife Center had dismissed her alert, citing storm conditions. One even joked over the radio, "She's probably found herself a cozy cave, Coulter. Relax." But Emma never relaxed. At 32, she had the quiet tenacity of someone who had never forgiven herself for playing it safe. Tall and wiry, with narrow shoulders and a long stride, Emma had left behind the safety of the academic path years ago. A rescue of orphaned foxes during her master's program changed her view of observing from afar. Field was risk. Field was truth. She packed quickly: emergency blanket, flare gun, protein bars, and a satellite ping device that only worked half the time. Her gray Subaru Outback crawled along the snow-laden forest road, tires fitted with chains. Past Willow Drop, the storm intensified. The wind made the trees bow in protest and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Then, without warning, a deep ridge of snow pulled at her tires. The vehicle lurched sideways into a shallow ditch. The engine sputtered. She cursed under her breath. After 2 failed attempts to reverse out, she realized she had 2 options: sit and freeze, or walk. Her phone displayed no bars. The emergency beacon flickered weakly. She remembered a derelict hunting cabin less than a mile off-road, once used by poachers and later abandoned by the state. It wasn't safe, but it was shelter. It took nearly 45 minutes of trudging through knee-deep snow for Emma to reach it. The cabin sagged against the wind, door half-hinged. Inside, it smelled of mildew and old smoke, but it held a wood stove, a few broken chairs, and a crate of mildewed wool blankets. Emma gathered dry bark from a busted crate and lit the fire. It hissed weakly to life. Smoke filled the air quickly. The flue was jammed. She opened a small window to vent the smoke, but the cold clawed back inside. Within minutes, her throat burned. Dizziness came fast. She tried to reach her beacon again, but her fingers felt slow. Then, black. Back at Caleb's cabin, the storm intensified. Inside the storage room, the wolves huddled in warmth. Caleb checked on them once every 30 minutes using a small pane of reinforced glass he had built into the dividing wall years ago. The pups had begun to twitch slightly, subtle signs of life. The mother's eyes blinked slowly now. Not trust, perhaps, but surrender. He sat by the fire, journal in hand. The entry was brief. Jan 18, wolf with 2 pups in storage room. Both pups weak, one not moving much. Mother calm. Wind howling harder now. Generator holding, no power from solar, emergency supply rationed. If this storm doesn't break, we'll be locked in. He poured himself a mug of hot water with dried lemon peel. He hadn't stocked tea in months. Outside, the trees groaned under snow weight. The sound of the storm felt closer. He opened the door for a moment to check the woodpile. Then he saw it. Tire tracks leading off trail, cutting across the tree line. Too recent for snowfall to have covered them. They veered toward Willowdrop and ended abruptly. He scanned the horizon. No movement. But something tightened in his chest. Instinct. He tossed 2 logs into a canvas sack and loaded his snowmobile, checking fuel. Whoever was in that vehicle hadn't made it far, and they wouldn't survive long. He turned toward the storage room, knocked gently on the door. A rustle answered from within. Good. Then he rode into the dark toward Willowdrop. At 2:56 a.m., Caleb Whitlock jolted awake in his chair beside the fire, his neck stiff from the awkward angle and the blanket tangled around his boots. The storm still screamed outside, rattling the stovepipe, but something had shifted in the silence inside the cabin. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, blinked at the lantern's low flicker, and turned toward the small window in the cabin wall that offered a view into the storage room. The mother wolf was awake. Her hulking shape lay curled around the 2 pups who were now covered in Caleb's thick wool blankets. Her ears twitched as she stared through the glass, not at him, but past him, to the firelight. Her eyes were yellow in the dark, but they had softened, no longer feral, but alert. One of the pups moved slightly, its back legs kicking faintly against its sibling. Caleb leaned closer, hand on the windowsill. Movement. That was hope. He stood quietly, careful not to scrape the wooden chair. From a crate near the stove, he pulled out an old camping thermos and filled it with water warmed over the fire. From a drawer in the narrow kitchenette, he found a half-pound of frozen deer meat, long since vacuum-sealed, likely a year old. It would do. He opened the door to the storage room slowly. Not stepping inside, but placing the thermos and meat on a flat piece of plywood he slid in with a gloved hand. The wolf did not rise, but her nostrils flared. She watched, but didn't growl. She didn't move for several minutes. Only after Caleb shut the door again did she rise, limp slightly toward the offerings and sniff them. She nudged the meat first, unsure, then nudged it again and finally ate. Slowly, as if allowing herself to accept a kind of truce. When she lowered her head to the thermos and began to drink, Caleb felt the knots in his back unwind, just slightly. It was a beginning. By sunrise, the storm had shifted. Not broken, but softened. The wind dropped to low moans across the ridge, and the snowfall became a gentle dust rather than a blizzard. Caleb geared up before dawn, layering thermal wool under a waterproof shell. He strapped the snow shovel to the rear of his snowmobile, clipped a flare gun to his belt, and stuffed a bag with blankets, iodine packets, and a small hatchet. He followed the path down the slope, backtracking the tire marks he'd seen the night before. The trail curved sharply, then ended at a sunken impression in the snow and a scattering of branches. Caleb dismounted and surveyed the area. His boot slipped on the frozen incline leading to a thicket. That's when he spotted it. A red knit glove. He took 2 cautious steps forward. 10 feet beyond the glove lay a set of broken branches around a low stone foundation, the remnants of the abandoned hunting shack. The door hung half open. Smoke stains blackened the inner beams, and snow filtered in through a broken section of roof. Caleb stepped inside, boots crunching over ice-covered floorboards. She was slumped in the corner. A woman, early 30s, curled tightly under a wool coat and cradling a field bag against her chest. Her lips were pale, her skin blotchy with smoke exposure, and her breaths came shallow and labored. "Ma'am?" Caleb knelt, checking her pulse. It fluttered but held. He examined the stove. Improvised fire, clogged flue, classic carbon monoxide poisoning, She'd burned wet wood, desperate to keep warm. The cabin had trapped the smoke. He lifted her carefully, supporting her head. Her hair, damp with sweat, clung to her cheek. She was light, maybe 110 pounds, but tall, nearly matching his height when upright. Her features were lean and angular, not from beauty maintenance but field living. Her coat was tagged Coulter. Back at his cabin, he lay her on the cot by the stove, placing warm rags along her neck and wrists. Her breathing deepened. She muttered something inaudible. He removed her boots, rubbed her feet slowly, one at a time, and wrapped them in dry socks from his gear chest. 2 hours later, she woke. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light. Green-gray with lashes darkened by moisture. She blinked, tried to sit up, then winced and fell back. "You're all right," Caleb said gently. "You were lucky. You passed out in an old trapper's cabin. I brought you here." She licked her lips, voice barely audible. "The wolf." Caleb hesitated, then nodded toward the wall. Through the glass panel, the mother wolf could be seen nursing her pups. One pup was half covered in blanket, the other licking its own paw. Emma's eyes widened. "Luna," she whispered. "It's her. I know that scar on her left flank. That's Luna." Caleb stepped back. "You know her?" Emma Coulter nodded slowly. "I'm a wildlife field biologist from Oregon State. I've been tracking that female since 2021. She vanished last year. No signal. I thought she was dead." Caleb poured a tin cup of water and handed it to her. She made it. Barely. Emma drank, then stared into the fire for several seconds. "How did you... Why would she let you..." "I didn't give her much choice," Caleb said. "Or maybe she didn't give me any. They were dying outside. I opened a door." Emma leaned forward, watching the wolves. "She trusts you. Or she's too tired to fight you." Caleb gave a dry smile. "Same thing sometimes." They sat in silence. The storm eased outside, light beginning to soften through the frosted glass windows. Emma slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a small handheld scanner. The red light blinked erratically. Luna's collar still pinged. Caleb watched her take down the data with steady hands, her face lit with quiet awe. "I need to call this in," she said, "but not yet. If word gets out that she's alive and here..." "She'll be hunted," Caleb finished for her, "or tracked to death." Emma nodded. "Or taken in the name of science. She needs time. They all do." Caleb stood and opened the hatch to check the meat stock. "Then for now, this stays between us." Emma met his gaze. "Agreed." Outside, the trees dripped with slow melt. A brief pause in winter's grip. Inside, a strange peace settled. It wasn't comfort, but it was a shared breath, a new bargain. The morning light arrived quietly, filtered through a veil of lingering snowfall that refused to let go of Silver Ridge. The trees, bowed under the weight of accumulated ice, glistened like glass. Despite the storm's slow retreat, the wind remained sharp, threading its way through the cracks of the cabin walls like a memory unwilling to fade. Caleb Whitlock, now on his 5th consecutive day without contact with the outside world, moved with a steadiness that came from habit, not hope. Inside the storage room, the warmth had held. The space, once used for camera gear and supplies, now resembled a sanctuary. Blankets still lined the floor, and in the far corner, the mother wolf, Luna, lay curled around her pups. One of them was attempting to stand, its back legs wobbly but determined. The second was licking its forepaw, yawning. Luna's ears twitched at every sound, but her posture remained low, not submissive, simply resigned. She no longer growled when Caleb opened the door. He kept his movements slow, deliberate. Each day he placed a dish of warm broth made from bone scraps and herbs. Always the same bowl, always the same spot, just inside the threshold. The first time, Luna only sniffed it. On the third day, she ate. Now she allowed the pups to approach it before her. One had developed a habit of sneezing into the broth and then looking proudly back at her. Luna didn't reprimand. She merely watched, alert. Caleb, standing at the doorway, felt an ache behind his sternum he hadn't named in years. Behind him, the main room was quiet, save for the ticking of the wood stove fan. Emma Coulter sat cross-legged near the fire, wrapped in one of his oversized flannel shirts that reached almost to her knees. Her wet outerwear hung drying near the hearth. Her hair, darker now that it had dried, framed a face lined by exhaustion but drawn tight with purpose. She held a notepad in one hand and a pen in the other, her gaze fixed on the behavior in the storage room. Her field instincts were fully engaged, even in the dim cabin light. "She's letting them roam a little farther from her each hour," Emma said softly, scribbling notes. "That's not just physical recovery. That's behavioral normalization." Caleb poured 2 mugs of boiled pine tea and handed one to her. "They're moving better today." Emma accepted the mug with a nod. "Luna was shot by poachers 2 years ago. I found her half dead near a baited trapline in Oregon. She dragged herself 5 miles. Somehow stayed alive until I could get a collar on her and release her near Mount Hood. Then she vanished. Off the grid. I thought she'd died for sure." Caleb looked back at Luna. "She didn't. She came this far." "I wonder why," Emma murmured, and how she remembered what kindness felt like. Caleb sat across from her, elbows on knees. "Wolves don't forget pain. But maybe they don't forget mercy either." Emma looked at him for a long beat. "Why did you help her? Most people would have shut the door." He sipped his tea. "Because I used to believe the world had gone cold for good. But that night, when I saw her carrying those pups through a blizzard, something cracked. I remembered what it was like to have someone depending on you." Emma tilted her head. "You lost someone." Caleb nodded. "My wife and son, wildfire, 7 years ago." She didn't say sorry. Didn't try to fill the silence. Just let it be. Caleb appreciated that. The morning passed slowly, the snow tapering off into tiny pinpricks. Emma moved to the desk by the window, connecting her handheld GPS reader to a backup battery. The signal from Luna's collar had stabilized. She marked the coordinates, then began logging behavior data. Resting patterns, feeding routines, maternal interactions. It was the most intimate set of wild wolf data she had ever gathered. In the afternoon, a subtle shift happened. One of the pups wandered toward the door of the storage room, sniffing the threshold where Caleb always knelt. Its small body was steady now, tail curling slightly in curiosity. Luna lifted her head but didn't intervene. Caleb sat down beside the door but didn't open it. He simply waited, breathing in the quiet, waiting for the pup to retreat or approach. It retreated, but slowly. Luna blinked, lowered her head again. The trust was real now. Fragile, but real. At sunset, Caleb stepped outside to chop firewood. The world was crystalline. Powdery snow atop hard ice, sun rays refracting into every shade of gold. From across the yard, he spotted something near the edge of the trees. Movement. A red fox, tail fluffed against the wind, paused at the tree line. Caleb stilled. The fox stared back, unblinking. Then it vanished, disappearing between the trunks. He breathed out. Winter was easing. The animals knew it before the humans did. That evening, while eating reheated beans and cornbread, Emma pulled out a folded piece of paper from her backpack. It was creased at the edges, handwritten, not typed. "A letter?" Caleb asked. She smiled faintly. "My sister wrote it to me 2 years ago. She died of lymphoma 6 months after. I carry it everywhere. She told me to keep doing the work no matter how lonely it felt. That wolves were worth it." Caleb's voice was quiet. "They are." Emma returned the letter to her bag. I think I'm going to stay longer." Caleb raised a brow. "In the cabin?" "Not forever," she chuckled. "But yes, for now. I have enough gear to rough it, and I think Luna's story needs to be documented. Carefully, respectfully. If that's all right with you." He nodded. "It's more than all right." The two sat quietly after that, watching the fire burn lower. On the other side of the wall, Luna rose and shifted positions, nudging her pups into a tighter curl. The snow outside began to fall again. Soft, light, not the brutal kind from nights before. Just a dusting. A breath between storms. They were not out of winter yet, but they were not alone in it either. The snow had stopped falling 3 days ago. What remained now was a quiet brilliance. A light that felt thinner, gentler. Sunlight that didn't warm so much as it promised warmth someday soon. Late March in Silver Ridge was still deep in snowpack, but the crust was thinning, and for the first time in weeks the wind didn't cut straight through the bones. The ridge shimmered under clear blue skies, and somewhere in the trees, water had begun to drip. Slow, steady, like a clock ticking in reverse. Inside the cabin, Caleb Whitlock stirred his second pot of pine needle tea. His beard had grown out over the past month, salt and charcoal threading through in equal measure. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of something ending. He could feel it in the way Luna had stopped glancing at the door, in the way her pups no longer whimpered when he stepped near. Emma Coulter sat at the edge of the cot, notebook balanced on her knees. She was sketching the floor plan of the storage room from memory, not because it mattered for publication, but because it mattered to her. She wore a patched field jacket over 2 layers of flannel, her boots caked in melting ice from her latest trip to refill the water canisters. Her hair, usually tied back, now hung freely around her face, unbothered and softened by time in the wild. "You think today's the day?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He watched the tendrils of steam rise from his mug. "She's been pacing the door for the last hour," he said. "Not like before. It's quieter. Decisive." Emma closed her notebook. "We shouldn't interfere." "I wasn't planning to." Caleb walked to the side entrance, the one that led to the storage room. The lock had been removed 2 weeks ago, once it was clear Luna didn't intend harm. The mother wolf had changed since that first night, thinner but alert, the wound on her flank healing, her coat regaining luster beneath the thaw. Her pups, now rambunctious with oversized paws and quick limbs, were nearly indistinguishable from juvenile yearlings. One had a splash of cream above its nose like a paintbrush had touched it. The other had striking black-tipped ears. Caleb opened the door. Sunlight flooded into the storage room, and all 3 wolves froze for a moment. Luna stood first. Her gaze swept the clearing beyond the cabin, then turned back toward Caleb. No growl, no sound, just breath and stillness. She walked to the pups, nuzzled each of them gently, then turned to the open doorway. She didn't sprint. She didn't hesitate either. Her pace was deliberate, a slow lope, as if the weight of the choice lay more in grace than urgency. Her pups followed. Not with fear, not with childish confusion, but with trust. Caleb and Emma stood in silence as the trio crossed the edge of the cabin clearing and slipped into the trees. At the last moment, Luna turned her head, her amber eyes resting on both of them just long enough for the message to settle. Then she was gone. Spring crept into Silver Ridge 1 hour at a time. The creek thawed. The foxes returned. Birds called again. By May, Caleb and Emma had typed out the first draft of a joint paper. They called it Instinct and Grace, mutual recognition in extreme conditions. It wasn't scientific proof of trust or intelligence or emotion. It was a story told through observation, of survival, resilience, and what happens when humans step back far enough to witness animals make their own decisions. They omitted names. They did not reference Luna. They included no location data, No GPS logs, no photographs. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about permission. Emma stayed longer than she planned. She found excuses, data to review, sample maps to redraw. Caleb didn't ask her to stay. He didn't need to. Every day they spoke less and understood more. On a morning in late April, the trees shimmered with frost, though the ground had thawed enough to show dark earth. Caleb stepped out with his usual mug of tea, scanning the ridgeline like he always did. He didn't expect anything, but something was there. At the edge of the trees, exactly where shadow met light, a figure stood. Gray, solid, still. Luna. She looked stronger than ever. Her ribs no longer showed. Her coat glistened in the light. She didn't approach. She didn't call. From behind her, 2 young wolves stepped out. Taller now, sharper featured with adult alertness. They moved with the coordinated rhythm of practiced independence, yet they stayed behind her, quiet, watching. Luna looked toward Caleb, not for help, not in warning, just recognition. Emma stepped out behind him, holding a field scope. Her breath caught audibly. "It's her," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "And those are the same pups." Caleb didn't speak. He raised his hand in the subtlest gesture. Not a wave, not a command. Just presence. Luna turned. She and the 2 wolves vanished into the trees like a dream deciding not to be remembered too clearly. No sounds, no drama. Only paw prints in the mud, already beginning to fade. Sometimes, the wild teaches us more about ourselves than any words ever could. In the quiet choices we make, opening a door, offering warmth, or simply standing still instead of turning away, we create the space for healing, both for others and for ourselves. Luna didn't ask for rescue, and Caleb never asked for thanks. Yet what blossomed between them was a silent understanding, built not on control, but on trust. And perhaps that's something we can carry into our own lives, to pause, to listen, to offer grace when it's least expected. Because the smallest act of kindness, especially in the coldest moments, can ripple further than we'll ever know. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear what part stayed with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the Hope Tales channel for more true tales of compassion and connection between people and animals. Thank you for spending this time with us.
They found her tied to a trash bin in the far corner of a silent park, a starving puppy with a yellow tag, and nothing but a red metal box beside her. No one saw who left her. No one heard her cry. But what happened next didn't just change her fate. It unraveled a truth buried in grief, memory, and love that refused to disappear. Stay with us. Because this isn't just a rescue story. It's about what home really means, and who's still worth waiting for. Let us know in the comments. What city are you watching this from? The first frost of the season had arrived early in Elmbrook. October had barely stepped in, but the breath of the Wisconsin wind was already sharp with warning. Sycamore Lake, which usually shimmered in soft ripples, now sat mostly still under a canopy of dull gray clouds. The trees lining the park had begun shedding their golden and rust-red coats, leaving a crisp layer beneath benches that tourists would no longer warm. The town was quiet, with children back in school and locals preparing their porches for Halloween. But in that silence, near the northern path of Sycamore Park, something stirred. Caleb Thorne adjusted the collar of his worn flannel shirt, his calloused hands tugging it tight against the wind as he pushed the maintenance cart along the gravel path. At 41, Caleb had the steady gait of a man used to early mornings and long silences. His dark blonde hair, cropped short at the sides, was starting to gray above his ears, and his jaw carried a shadow of stubble he never bothered to shave clean anymore. His shoulders were strong but weary, like everything about him had once been built for something harder than leaf blowing and fixing picnic tables. Caleb had moved to Elmbrook 7 years ago, after his wife, Anne, passed from ovarian cancer. The grief didn't show in tears, but in the way he rarely spoke, and when he did, It was with a gentle reserve that felt more like apology than assertion. Most people in town respected that quiet. He was the man who fixed the lampposts before anyone noticed they flickered. The man who replaced the American flag above the lake before dawn on Memorial Day. A man who showed up, even if he never said much. He was halfway through his morning check when he heard it. A sound so faint he nearly dismissed it as the creak of a trash bin lid in the wind. But then it came again. A whimper, high-pitched, fragile. Caleb stopped. Slowly, he pushed the cart closer to the row of dumpsters tucked behind the restrooms, where overgrown grass had begun to curl along the pavement's edge. One green trash bin, older than the others and scuffed near the bottom, stood slightly ajar, and behind it, nestled in the narrow space where shadow met damp brick, was a small, motionless figure. He crouched instinctively, his breath caught. A puppy. A German shepherd, maybe 3 months old, lay curled in a tight crescent, ribs visible beneath patchy fur that had once been golden and black, but now clung to her in matted clumps. A plastic rope, bright orange and frayed, was tied taut around her belly and looped through the trash bin's rusted handle. Her head was low, but not limp, eyes wide open, dry and dulled. Around her neck was a yellow plastic tag, cracked but legible. It read, Hazel. Caleb didn't move at first. The puppy didn't either. Beside her, a metallic red box, dented at one corner, rested in the dirt, like an offering no one meant to keep. The lid was half open. Inside, Caleb could just make out the edges of a pale blue towel, the kind used for babies. There was a knotted rawhide chew bone, untouched, a small brush with a broken handle, and a folded piece of paper stained and soft from moisture. The writing had run in the ink. Only a few letters remained clear. Sorry, I can't anymore. Something inside Caleb, something long quiet, rose to the surface. He unzipped his coat and moved with slow, deliberate hands. Hey, girl, he whispered, voice graveled by cold and distance. Let's get you warm. The puppy didn't flinch when he cut the rope with the box cutter from his pocket. She let herself be lifted, light as wind, head resting against his arm like she hadn't done that in a while but still remembered how. Caleb wrapped her inside his coat and turned toward the service road that led to the maintenance building tucked on the edge of the park. He could feel her shivering against his chest. Silent, controlled, like a child who'd already learned not to cry. The inside of the maintenance station smelled of pine cleaner and old coffee. Caleb set her down gently in the padded chair near the heater. He filled a small tin bowl with warm water and poured the last of his thermos's chicken broth into another. She didn't drink, just watched him with eyes that seemed too old for her small frame. Caleb picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There weren't many, but one stood out. Emily Carter. She answered after 2 rings. Elmbrook Veterinary Services. This is Dr. Carter. Hey, Emily, it's Caleb, from the park. Hi, Caleb. Everything okay? I need your help, he said, eyes locked with Hazel's. It's a puppy. Emily Carter was new in town, having opened her veterinary clinic just 3 weeks ago. At 34, she had the poised professionalism of someone who'd worked in big city ERs but chose something quieter after life cracked open beneath her. She had dark auburn hair, usually tied back in a low twist, and soft features that didn't betray how hard she'd fought to rebuild herself. After losing her first child to miscarriage the year before, Emily had walked away from Chicago, from her marriage, from her former clinic. Elmbrook was supposed to be temporary, but she wasn't sure anymore. She arrived within 15 minutes, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her parka zipped to the chin. Where is she? She asked without preamble. Caleb nodded toward the heater. Behind the chair. Emily knelt, her voice softening the moment her eyes landed on the puppy. Oh, sweetheart. Hazel didn't move, but her ears twitched. Emily reached out with practiced hands, gentle yet thorough. 3 months maybe, malnourished, dehydrated, no visible fractures but her left paw's swollen, might be an early sprain, and, she paused, she's been starving for a while. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. She was tied behind the dumpster, had a tag, Hazel, and a box. It had stuff in it, looked like someone tried to prepare her for being left. Emily looked up at him, her expression unreadable. This is your find? He nodded. This morning. She placed a stethoscope to Hazel's chest, then turned her head slightly. Her heart's strong. That's a good sign. She hasn't eaten. She might not right away. Not after this. Trauma like this. Dogs dissociates, same as people. She's here, but not really. She sat back on her heels and looked at Caleb. We can take her to the clinic, run fluids, keep her overnight. But Caleb shook his head. Number, let her stay here for tonight. I'll watch her. She already made it through the cold alone. This is better than a cage. Emily studied him for a second longer than necessary. All right, she said slowly. I'll bring what you need to keep her stable overnight. But Caleb, she hesitated. Don't get too attached. You know how these things go. He nodded, but something in his eyes didn't agree. He reached down and gently placed the red metal box beside Hazel. She turned her head, just slightly, her nose twitching as it brushed the towel. Emily packed her bag in silence, but before she left, she stood beside Caleb. Her name suits her, she murmured. Hazel, soft, but strong. And then she left, the door shutting behind her with a click that echoed more loudly than expected. Caleb looked down at Hazel, who was watching the box again, and for the first time that morning, her tail moved. Just barely. Just once. Caleb hadn't planned on sleeping at the maintenance cabin, but he'd brought a wool blanket and his thermos anyway, as if part of him already knew he wouldn't be leaving Hazel that night. The small heater in the corner hummed with effort, casting soft orange light over the wooden floor and onto the metal red box that now sat beside the chair. Hazel had not moved much since Emily left, though her body no longer trembled. She slept light, ears twitching, legs occasionally tensing like they were preparing to run. Outside, the wind rattled through thinning branches, and a few leaves scraped the window like fingers trying to get in. Caleb had set up a folded sleeping mat beside Hazel's chair. Around midnight, he lit the small stove in the kitchenette and warmed some chicken breast in low-sodium broth. He cut it into slivers, just enough to tempt. Hazel, still lying in the curl of the blanket, lifted her head slightly as the scent drifted close. It was the first time she moved voluntarily. Caleb didn't push. He simply placed the bowl nearby and lay back, arms folded, eyes half closed. He didn't sleep much. But just before dawn, he heard the soft scrape of a bowl nudged across the floor and the quietest lapping of tongue on warm broth. He smiled without opening his eyes. The morning sun came late and faint. Elmbrook, wrapped in its seasonal hush, offered a cold stillness that mirrored the calm inside the cabin. Caleb stood by the window sipping coffee, watching mist curl off the lake beyond the pines. Behind him, Hazel was now standing, barely. Her legs shook, especially the front right, but she was upright, sniffing cautiously at the metal box. He watched her walk over to it, then nudged the lid with her nose. Something inside that box still called to her. Caleb crouched nearby, not reaching out, just present. He opened the lid again. The blue towel was slightly stained now, likely from wet paws or old dirt. Beneath it, he found something he hadn't seen the night before. Folded into the edge seam was a small square of fabric, hand-stitched in uneven lines. Embroidered in faded lavender thread were 5 simple words. "I'll always love you, Em." Caleb's fingers froze on the stitching. Whoever left Hazel hadn't been careless. They had loved her once. That realization struck deeper than abandonment. He gently folded the cloth and placed it atop the box. That morning, Caleb called Emily. "Back so soon?" she asked, voice warm but surprised. "I didn't sleep at home." "She okay?" She ate, a little, and walked, weak but steady. Emily paused. "I can come by in an hour, if that's all right." Caleb said it was. Emily Carter arrived with her usual dark green coat, hair in a loose braid, cheeks flushed from the morning chill. She brought a fresh saline bag, antibiotics, and a small plush fox toy that had once been a giveaway at a vet conference. She might like a soft friend, she said casually, but the gesture lingered longer than her tone suggested. Hazel sniffed Emily's hand before retreating slightly. Not out of fear, but reserve. Emily crouched and offered her palm again. Hazel held her gaze, then extended her nose and gave the faintest lick to the base of Emily's thumb. A quiet exhale escaped from Emily's lips. "That's new," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "She's trying." Emily gave Hazel her injection and changed the bandage on her paw. "The swelling's come down. If she keeps eating, she won't need clinic care, but I'd still like to check on her daily, if you don't mind." Caleb hesitated. "I don't." There was a pause before Emily added, "And maybe, I just want to." The afternoon light settled across the table, where Caleb had laid out notes and park maintenance logs. Emily lingered longer than needed, sipping coffee from the chipped mug she found in his cabinet. Caleb wasn't much of a host, but he brought out a small plate of graham crackers and set them between them in silence. Hazel lay curled nearby, the fox toy between her paws. Later, as Emily prepared to leave, she stood near the door, hesitating with her hand on the knob. "You know," she said softly, "I lost a child last year." Caleb turned slowly. He didn't speak. Emily kept her gaze on the doorframe. "It was week 19. We named her Molly. I never even got to hold her, just watched the monitor stop moving." Her voice didn't tremble. "It was too tired to tremble. I've been floating ever since. Not fully here, not really attached to anything." Caleb, standing by the window, looked at her, not with pity, but with understanding. "I think that's why I came to Elmbrook," she continued. "I thought, maybe in a place like this, the quiet might help me remember how to stay." Her eyes finally met his. "And then Hazel." She looked at me like she wasn't sure if I was real either. Caleb offered a small nod. "I know that look." Emily stepped out into the wind with a soft, "See you tomorrow," and walked toward her white Subaru, parked beneath the sycamores. That night, Caleb pulled the red box closer to Hazel's blanket. She pawed at it once, then placed her chin on the top. Caleb sat nearby, not speaking, just carving the words, "I'll always love you," M into his memory. He didn't know who M was, but the message was now stitched into more than fabric. It was stitched into Hazel's silence, and the way she'd started to come back to life. In the far corner of the room, under a tin lamp, Caleb opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a faded photograph of Anne holding their old black lab, Huxley, who had passed 2 winters before her. He looked at the photo, then at Hazel. "You'd have liked her," he said softly. Hazel stirred. By morning, Emily was back again. This time, she wore a deep blue sweater and brought a small notebook with her. "It's old," she said. "I used to journal a lot. I stopped, thought maybe I'd try again." She placed it next to her bag, then knelt beside Hazel. "She's brighter," she said, checking her eyes. "Not as flat." Caleb nodded. "She slept all night, barely moved, but she kept the box next to her." They sat in quiet for a while, listening to the park waking up, geese overhead, leaves skittering across the cement, distant laughter of early joggers. Hazel barked once. Not loud, not fearful, just present. Emily smiled and scribbled something in her notebook. Caleb didn't ask what. That evening, after Hazel had eaten 3/4 of her food and had taken 3 short steps outside without retreating, Caleb sat beside her on the old maintenance cot and leaned back. "I think she's going to stay," he said aloud. Hazel didn't respond. She didn't need to. The way she tucked herself beside the red box and rested her paw over the embroidered towel said enough. By the 5th morning, the frost had begun to bite harder. The wind off Sycamore Lake no longer whispered but pressed in with steady hands, wrapping around every bare branch and shuttered cabin like a reminder that winter was always closer than expected in Elmbrook. The park had shed most of its color, leaving behind a skeletal landscape of gray trunks and rust-stained leaves. But for Caleb Thorne, it was the perfect kind of silence. The kind that didn't demand anything but presence. Hazel had been waking earlier, her eyes brighter, her appetite steadier. Her ribs were no longer painfully visible, and the patch of fur above her right shoulder had started to fill in with a fuzzier shade of sable. She still limped slightly on her front paw, but she walked now with a kind of careful purpose, especially when Caleb opened the cabin door and called her name. That morning, he clipped a soft harness over her back, adjusted the straps gently, and looped the leash onto the metal ring. "Time to see the world again," he murmured. Hazel tilted her head as if she understood. Caleb led her down the old walking path that wound behind the maintenance building and curved toward Sycamore Lake's eastern edge. The path was paved in faded red brick. Some cracked, Others tilted slightly with time, ending at a quiet lookout where a wooden bench faced the water. Hazel moved slowly, her ears alert but relaxed, sniffing the ground, then the cold air, then the path ahead. When they reached the bench, she stopped on her own, circled twice, and lay down in the exact center of the bricks. Not under the bench, not behind it. Dead center, as if she had once been here before. Caleb sat beside her, wrapping his coat tighter. For several minutes, neither moved. The lake lapped gently against its banks. Ducks floated lazily in the distance. Hazel's gaze never left the narrow side path that led back to the parking lot. It was paved differently, more modern, with even concrete and freshly painted lines. But there, at the junction between the two paths, stood an old street lamp with a missing top cover. Hazel stared at it like it meant something, like someone had once stood there and waved goodbye. Caleb watched her closely. "You're waiting for someone," he said quietly. "Aren't you?" Hazel didn't move, but her body tensed slightly. Later that day, Emily Carter parked her Subaru just outside the veterinary clinic and stepped out, pulling her hood up against the sharp wind. She'd had a full morning of checkups. 2 barn cats with infected eyes, a retriever with a rash from oak leaves, and a senior beagle who refused to stop eating socks. But none of it had stayed with her like Hazel's quiet stare at the embroidered cloth had. The moment had followed her all week, soft as smoke, but persistent. On her lunch break, Emily took her coffee and walked across the road to the edge of Sycamore Park. It wasn't uncommon for her to walk while thinking. She had always processed through motion. The trees rustled as she passed, brittle leaves clinging like secrets to branches that would soon be bare. As she neared the benches overlooking the lake, she noticed an older woman placing cracked corn along the low railing for birds. The woman stood no taller than 5 feet, hunched slightly, with thick silver hair braided into a bun and pinned with a wooden stick. She wore a faded green wool coat and tan lace-up boots that had seen better decades. Her hands were bare despite the cold, the fingers gnarled with arthritis but still deft. She turned when Emily approached, eyes blue-gray and sharp beneath the weathered skin. "Afternoon," the woman said, her voice strong despite her age. "Afternoon," Emily replied, sipping her coffee. "Feeding time?" "Always. They remember. Birds don't forget kindness." Emily smiled. "I'm Emily Carter. I run the clinic over on Crescent." The woman nodded. "Eda Monroe. I've lived in that yellow house just across the bluff for 32 years, longer than some of these trees." Emily glanced toward the thinned-out row of maples behind them. "You must see a lot from that porch." "I see everything people think they're hiding." There was silence for a beat. Then Emily asked, "Do you ever see a young woman around here, maybe early 20s or younger, brown hair, small frame, often walking alone, maybe with a dog?" Eda didn't answer immediately. She leaned on the rail and squinted toward the far edge of the lake. "You mean the girl with the oversized hoodie? Used to sit near the red path, had a puppy with her, shepherd-looking thing." Emily's heart skipped. "Yes. She stopped coming about a week and a half ago. Last time I saw her, it was nearly dark. She walked straight toward the dumpsters behind the restrooms. Dog was limping. She left crying." Emily exhaled slowly. "Did you see where she went after?" "Number just gone. I thought maybe she was passing through, but the dog, it didn't want to follow. It kept looking back." Eda turned fully toward Emily then. "Something happened, didn't it?" Emily nodded. "The dog's with me now. Well, with a man who found her. She's trying to come back." The old woman stared at her a moment longer, then said, "We all come back to something, even if it hurts." That evening, back at the maintenance cabin, Caleb lit the wood stove and laid out Hazel's blanket near the door. She had started choosing that spot every evening now. Close to the outside, but not quite leaving it behind. He pulled the red box closer, took out the cloth again, and set it on the windowsill, where the last light touched it. Hazel rested her head on her paws, eyes watching the fabric as if it were telling her a bedtime story. Emily arrived just as the sun began to sink. She stepped inside without knocking, something she never would have done weeks earlier. Caleb looked up from the chair and gestured toward the kettle on the stove. "Tea? I'd love some," she said. As the kettle warmed, Emily told him about Eda, about the girl, about the path. Hazel didn't lift her head, but her ears turned toward the sound. "I think whoever left her didn't want to," Emily said quietly. "I think it broke them to do it." Caleb stared at the flickering stove. Then why here? Maybe this was the only place that had once felt safe. Hazel rose slowly and limped over to the red box. She nudged it with her nose, then sat beside it like a soldier at post. Emily placed her hand gently on Hazel's head. "She's waiting." Caleb nodded. "I know." That night, after Emily had gone, and Hazel was asleep with the box tucked beneath her paw, Caleb took out his old carpenter's knife and a piece of birchwood from the stack. Slowly, carefully, he carved the word Hazel into the wood. Then, underneath it, in smaller letters, Gatekeeper. The letter arrived on a cold Monday, folded unevenly and sealed in a thin, creased envelope without a return address. Caleb found it tucked into the slotted wooden box outside the ranger station, the same box where locals usually submitted noise complaints or requests for event permits. But this envelope was handwritten in purple ink, the kind that smeared when damp, and it bore only one word in shaky script on the front: Hazel. Caleb stood there for a moment in the crisp wind before walking back inside. Hazel was lying on the braided rug beside his bed, chin resting over one paw, her eyes half closed but watchful. She no longer hid beneath the cot, or cowered at the sound of boots against the wooden floor. Each night now, she curled beside him, her body warming the edge of his mattress like a quiet sentinel. She looked up as he entered, ears twitching, then sighed and dropped her head again. He sat at the desk, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "I'm sorry. I know what I did was wrong. I think about her every night. I still hear her collar jingling even when there's nothing there. I wanted to keep her. I did. But I couldn't. I'm not someone a dog like her deserves. She deserves warmth, food, stability. I couldn't even give her a safe place to sleep. She was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't vanishing, but I knew keeping her would make things worse for both of us. I left her with her box because it was all I had left to give. That towel used to be my mother's. She said it would always keep me warm, even when she wasn't around. I hoped Hazel could feel that too. Please don't hate me. I still love her, but I had to let her go. M." Caleb folded the paper slowly and placed it beside the red box, now resting permanently on the windowsill. He looked at Hazel. "You weren't abandoned," he murmured. "You were released." The distinction mattered more than he expected. That same afternoon, Emily sat in the back of Elmbrook's tiny public library, hunched over a microfilm reader. Her fingers, slender and steady from years of stitching small animal wounds, now moved with quiet desperation across the scroll knob as images flickered past. She had traced Marissa Lawn's name through the local youth shelter's closed files. Nothing recent, but a volunteer named Joyce had recalled a shy girl with a puppy who once stayed in their transitional cottage near Hollow Pine Avenue. That had been 3 months ago. It wasn't until Emily searched archived obituaries that she found the piece that completed the shadow. Marilyn Lawn, 45, passed away following complications from a head injury caused by a vehicle collision. She is survived by her daughter, Marissa. The date was just under a year ago. Emily stared at the screen. She imagined a girl, no more than 19, grappling with trauma, with hunger, with loss so deep it blurred her sense of self. A girl who had once been given a puppy as a final tether to love, then forced to watch that tether fray under the weight of reality. Hazel hadn't been a pet. She'd been a promise. A reminder that someone once believed in her. Emily printed the obituary, folded it into her pocket, and walked home beneath the bone-pale sky. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, the journal open before her. Her handwriting had returned, steady, even graceful again. Hazel isn't just recovering, she's remembering, and so am I. We call abandonment what is often just exhaustion. We call letting go a failure, but sometimes it's mercy in disguise. Marissa didn't fail Hazel. She preserved her the only way she could. Emily paused, then added one final line in a softer script. Love doesn't always mean holding on. It sometimes means becoming part of someone else's rescue. The next day, she shared the obituary with Caleb. "She's out there," Emily said, her voice measured. "Somewhere." Caleb read the clipping twice, then looked up. "And she might still be looking back." Hazel, as if on cue, walked across the room to the red box, poured it softly, then lay down with her head resting on the embroidered towel once again. There was no whimper, no whine, only stillness, the kind that wasn't empty anymore. That evening, Caleb lit the lantern by the window and unpacked a cardboard box he hadn't opened since last winter. Inside were tools, some spare canvas, a thin wooden panel he had meant to use for signage, but never finished. Slowly, with Hazel curled nearby, he began carving again. Not letters this time, but lines, curves, delicate details. A scene was beginning to emerge, a small dog standing on a path of brick, facing a lake. Behind her, a hand reaching out. Ahead of her, another waiting. He worked late into the night, Emily stopping by only to sit in silence with them, her presence as unspoken as her care. Hazel was different now. She still had her quiet hours, her pauses at the window, but she also wagged her tail when Caleb entered. She nudged Emily's knee during tea. She even barked. A single, light sound when the postman tapped on the glass. It wasn't fear, it was permission. She had begun to accept the space as hers. On Wednesday, Caleb found another note. This time slipped beneath the cabin door, written in the same purple ink. I can't ask where she is. I don't want to mess up her new life, but thank you for keeping her safe. Caleb turned the note over. Nothing on the back. Emily read it later that day and sat quietly for a while. Then she stood and said, "If we ever find her, I want to be the one who tells her she didn't fail." Caleb looked at her. "You already are." That night, Hazel slept beside the red box, her body curled tight but her face peaceful. Caleb stood at the door and watched the moon rise over Sycamore Lake, the pale silver light turning the world to porcelain. Then he stepped inside, picked up the wooden panel, and placed it gently beside Hazel's box. It wasn't finished, but neither were they. By the time the final frost arrived, Sycamore Lake had turned to glass. Morning walks were edged with crunching leaves and visible breath, but the cabin was warm now, warmer than it had been in years. The stove glowed every evening. Hazel's blanket had moved permanently beside Caleb's cot, though she often wandered closer in the night, curling just beneath the edge of the bed. She no longer slept with one ear alert. She didn't flinch when Boots stepped over the threshold or when birds burst from the pines. She barked now, softly, purposefully. When Caleb woke, when Emily knocked, when the mail truck rolled in. The adoption was finalized that Friday. Caleb stood in the back office of the Elmbrook Parks Department, filling out the last page of paperwork, while Hazel waited patiently on the braided rug near his feet. The woman behind the desk, Nancy Alder, was in her 60s, short and solidly built, with thick brown hair swept into a low bun. Her glasses hung from a red cord around her neck, and she wore a windbreaker with the town crest embroidered over the heart. Nancy had been with the department for over 30 years, and she took her role seriously, but not without kindness. "Not every maintenance guy puts this kind of time in," she said, stamping the final form. "She's lucky, but I'm guessing you feel like the lucky one." Caleb glanced down at Hazel, who thumped her tail twice against the floor. "I do." Back at the cabin, he unpacked a small velvet pouch from his desk drawer. Inside was a collar he'd ordered from a local craftsman, dark brown leather, stitched in green thread. A small silver tag hung from the ring, engraved with a new name and a new number. He fastened it gently around Hazel's neck, then clipped the old yellow tag to the ring beside it. He didn't need to keep it separate. Her past wasn't a secret. It was part of her name now. He turned to the red box on the shelf above the bed, now clean and polished, its corners carefully repaired. Caleb set it down on the floor, and Hazel padded over, sniffed it once, then sat beside it. Her place, her history, her choice. On the outside wall of the cabin, just beside the doorway, Caleb mounted a small wooden plaque he'd carved in the evenings. It was simple, sanded, smooth and sealed for the winter. The words etched in the center were painted in soft gold. Hazel, the keeper of my sky. Across town, just off Crescent Lane, a new sign went up over a freshly painted white door, Elmbrook Animal Care. The building had once been a post office, long since abandoned, but Emily had seen potential in its brick bones and southern-facing windows. She'd worked quietly for weeks, applying for permits, gathering used equipment, painting over the old tile. Caleb had helped install new counters, built wooden exam tables from reclaimed pine, and fitted a porch bench from salvaged oak. When he handed her the final piece, a framed photo of Hazel sitting by the lake, Emily hung it in the waiting room before anything else. Emily Carter looked different now. Not drastically. Her face was still slender, her auburn hair still braided when she worked, but her eyes had a steadier light. She moved with purpose again, not just habit. She laughed more, still soft, still private, but more often. And when people entered her clinic, they noticed her patience, the way she kneeled to greet each animal, the way she asked owners about their days as if she meant it. Hazel came to the clinic most mornings, her leash tied loosely to the porch railing. She greeted dogs with polite sniffs, cats with cautious eyes, and humans with quiet recognition. She didn't bark unless it was necessary. The townspeople started calling her the healer's shadow. Kids left treats in small tins by the door. One little girl even brought a hand-drawn picture of Hazel wearing a superhero cape. Emily taped it to the clinic fridge. One afternoon, while replacing a light bulb outside, Caleb found himself staring through the window as Emily knelt beside an old Labrador. Her hand rested gently over the dog's heart. Her mouth moved in what seemed like prayer or gratitude. Caleb wasn't sure which, but whatever it was, it felt right. That evening, as the sun dipped behind Sycamore Lake, they met again at the bench overlooking the water. Caleb brought 2 mugs of spiced cider, the steam curling into the gold-tinged air. Hazel climbed up beside them without hesitation, her paws resting on Caleb's thigh, her nose tilted toward the breeze. "I can't remember the last time I sat like this," Emily said quietly. "Me neither," Caleb replied. Hazel stretched out between them, ears twitching but eyes half closed. A warm gust of wind passed through, scattering the last brittle leaves across the path. For a long while, none of them moved. Caleb looked at Emily, her face framed in the amber glow. "You ever think this would be it?" "This?" she smiled. "A bench, a dog, cider that tastes more like cinnamon than apples." "Number, I mean this. Peace." Emily didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "I think I stopped expecting it, and that made it easier to see when it finally arrived." Hazel lifted her head, let out a long breath, then curled against Caleb's side. The red box sat tucked in the corner of the porch, beside Emily's medical bag. It wasn't hidden. It didn't need to be. It had already done what it was made for, carried love far enough to find a safe place to land. That night, as the stars blanketed the lake, Hazel walked the cabin's perimeter one last time, then settled in her usual spot near the bed. Caleb watched her as he undressed, turned out the lantern, and lay beneath the thick quilt. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered into the dark, "You're home now, girl." Hazel didn't bark. She didn't need to. She simply sighed. And it was the sound of everything finally coming full circle. Sometimes the ones we think are broken are simply waiting for someone to see them whole. Hazel didn't need fixing. She needed a place to feel safe, to be seen, and to belong. Just like her, many of us carry a past, a red box of memories we're not ready to let go of. But healing doesn't always begin with answers. Sometimes it starts with quiet presence, a shared bench, or a whispered, "You're home now." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Hope Tales channel, and tap the bell so you never miss a story that might stay with you long after the screen fades. Thank you for watching.